The palace of Vardax gleamed under the twin moons of the Tsilka system. Towering spires of silver and obsidian rose against the midnight sky, illuminated by the flickering lights of hovering platforms and shimmering energy fields. Yet amidst all the grandeur, the royal chambers remained a sanctuary, a place where Princess Alara could indulge in her favorite pastime, testing her boundaries. From the massive marble balcony of her suite, she watched the city pulse with life, her fingers lightly brushing the smooth surface of her wine glass. Below, the courtiers milled about, their hushed voices barely audible over the hum of the city's core energy. The grand ball held no interest for Alara. She had no need for an audience tonight. She had something far more entertaining in mind. A soft sound, the almost imperceptible swish of boots against the floor, drew her attention. Without turning, she knew it was him. "Captain Hunter," she said, her voice lilting with playful authority. "I trust the evening has been suitably uneventful." Jax Hunter, her personal guard and one of the few humans to be given such an esteemed position in the Tsilka Palace, stepped into the room. He stood at attention, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. His dark brown eyes, intense and calculating, locked on her, but he did not respond. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to send a subtle message. He was ever watchful, ever ready, even for the princess's games. Alara's lips curled into a mischievous smile. "You don't speak much, do you, Captain?" Jax remained silent, his gaze unwavering. He was a man of few words, focused entirely on his duty. Perhaps that was why Alara found him so endlessly fascinating. He was the one person who did not indulge her every whim or bend to her will without question. It was a challenge, a rare one. Given her position, with a subtle wave of her hand, she raised a glass of wine she held to her lips. The glass hovered in the air, suspended by nothing more than the force of her telekinetic power. She could feel the weight of Jax's gaze from behind, the way his body stiffened just slightly as she made the motion. His composure was one of his defining qualities, but she was determined to test its limits. "Would you care to join me, Captain?" she asked, her voice like honey, sweet and dangerous. The wine swirled in the air as if taunting him. Jax's jaw tightened imperceptibly. He took a single step forward, but stopped just short of the balcony's edge. He met her gaze, his eyes narrowing ever so slightly. "You're playing with fire, Princess." Alara's laughter echoed through the room like a soft chime. "Fire?" she repeated. "Perhaps, but I don't think you'll get burned." With that, she flicked her wrist, sending the glass of wine shooting forward with a burst of kinetic energy. It stopped just inches from Jax's face, freezing in midair as if daring him to move. The room held its breath for a heartbeat, the tension thickening between them. Jax's eyes never wavered. He didn't flinch, but there was a flicker of something else, something more dangerous than mere frustration. For a fleeting moment, Alara saw it, a glimmer of intrigue. Her amusement deepened. "You know," Alara said casually, "there are easier ways to handle a challenge than simply standing still." In one swift motion, she let the glass fall. It shattered against the stone floor, the wine splashing across the marble. But her gaze never left Jax. She didn't need to see his reaction to know how he would respond. Jax didn't speak. He didn't need to. Instead, he moved with lethal precision. Before she could blink, he had closed the distance between them, his hand on her arm, steadying her. "That was a mistake, Princess," he said, his voice low but firm. There was no anger in it, just the kind of quiet warning she had grown used to. He was always calm, always controlled, but she could sense the restrained frustration underneath, the ever-present tension between his duty and his growing awareness of her unpredictable nature. The intensity of his touch lingered, and Alara felt a pulse of something she hadn't anticipated, a stirring of recognition that wasn't just from the game. Her telekinetic grip faltered, and for a moment, she was no longer the powerful princess who could bend the world around her. She was a woman, caught in the web of her own game. She smiled. "You're not going to scold me, are you, Jax?" His eyes softened, but only just. Someone has to keep you grounded. Grounded. It was a word that felt foreign to Alara, as if it were something she could never truly understand. Her life was a series of floating worlds, planets, palaces, and battles where she was always the one in control. But when Jax was around, when his presence anchored her, the very ground beneath her feet felt unstable, as though she were being pulled into uncharted territory. Before she could respond, a sudden surge of power from outside the chamber rattled the walls. The air hummed with an intensity that vibrated through her bones. "Princess," Jack said immediately, his hand releasing her arm. "We need to go. Now." Alara's smile faded, her instincts kicking in. She had felt it too, the unmistakable pulse of danger. "Wait," she whispered, her voice more serious now. The playful game was over, the shift in the air enough to make even the princess take pause. "Do you feel it?" Jax nodded, his eyes narrowing. "We're not alone." Before Lara could react, the palace's alert system blared to life, signaling an invasion, one she had not anticipated. As the first blast of energy struck the palace's outer walls, Alara knew that the game had ended. The forces she had often toyed with, the powers that she had so carelessly wielded, were about to face something much darker, something more dangerous. And Jax Hunter, the stoic human who had kept her grounded, was about to find out just how deeply the consequences of their actions would run. The princess's game had ended, but a far greater challenge was about to begin. In this version, I focused on building the tension and dynamics between the princess and her human guard, adding a sense of intrigue and foreboding as the action begins to unfold. The story moves from light-hearted teasing to a more serious, world-changing threat, creating a sharp contrast and making the stakes feel much higher. The night had fallen swiftly over Vardax, leaving the palace shrouded in an unsettling calm. Alara stood in the command center, her once playful demeanor replaced with the sharp focus of a leader. The once magnificent halls of the palace had transformed into an emergency war room, bustling with activity as the royal advisors and defense officers scrambled to analyze the attack. Jack stood by her side, his posture still as rigid as ever. Despite the gravity of the situation, Alara could sense a subtle shift in him, a faint undercurrent of tension that wasn't there before. The unspoken words between them hung in the air, but the threat outside was far more immediate. The loud hum of the security system thrummed through the walls as holographic displays flickered to life, showing the images of ships in orbit, ships that weren't supposed to be there. "Princess." A voice cut through her thoughts. It was Draxon, her chief advisor, a tall and lean Silka with sharp features and an even sharper mind. He was the one who had managed the kingdom's security systems for years. His eyes were wide with concern as he glanced at the massive holoscreen in front of them. "This is unlike anything we've seen before. These ships are not from any known fleet in the galaxy. They're cloaked, heavily shielded." Ilara's gaze remained fixed on the screen, her mind working furiously to piece together the puzzle. Vardax's outer defenses were supposed to be impenetrable. The Tsilka, with their mastery over energy fields and technology, had never encountered a threat like this. "How is this possible?" she asked, her voice cutting through the room. "We don't know yet," Draxon replied, frustration evident in his tone. "It's as if they appeared out of nowhere. Our scanners can't track their movements. And there's something off about the readings we're getting. They don't belong to any known faction, not even to the Akai, the military might of the Galrith Empire." Alara's eyes narrowed. "So who are they?" Jack stepped forward, his face stern. "That's what we need to figure out. These ships could belong to anyone with the technology to slip through our defenses. If they've been working with someone on the inside..." He didn't finish the thought, but Alara could feel it, the possibility that there was a traitor among them. The idea stung her more than she expected. Trust was a fragile thing, and as much as she liked to play games with Jax, she knew one truth that had always remained constant. When it came to matters of survival, she couldn't afford to question her allies. Suddenly, the lights flickered and a deep, resonating hum echoed throughout the palace. The floor beneath their feet trembled as a wave of energy rippled through the atmosphere, shaking the entire structure. Ilara's eyes widened in shock as she felt the power surge, a signal of a devastating weapon being deployed. "Get to the shield generators," she shouted, her voice laced with urgency. "Now!" Jax's hand was already on his weapon, his training kicking in. "Princess, stay behind me," he said, his tone no longer laced with the teasing humor she was accustomed to. The seriousness of the moment had taken over, and there was no room for games. Ilara nodded, but as they moved through the corridors, her mind raced. She could feel the presence of the enemy, looming just beyond the palace walls, like a dark cloud waiting to strike. The unknown fleet had unleashed an energy wave that now seemed to encircle the city, like a tightening noose. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that something far more sinister lay beneath the surface of this attack. "Do you sense it?" she asked, her voice low, barely above a whisper. Jax didn't respond immediately, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed him. He, too, felt it, a creeping dread that was foreign to both of them. Even Ilara's telekinetic senses, usually so attuned to the slightest disturbances, could not pinpoint the source. It was as if the enemy was everywhere and nowhere at once. They reached the shield control room, a high-tech command center filled with Silka engineers and technicians. The air was thick with anxiety as they worked frantically to adjust the palace's protective barrier. "Princess," one of the technicians said, his voice trembling. "The shields, they're failing. The energy wave has caused critical damage to the generator. We can't hold out much longer." "How long until it's breached?" Ilara demanded, stepping forward, her command unwavering. "Minutes," the technician replied. "The energy pulse is disrupting everything. We need more time." Ilara's jaw tightened. Time was a luxury she no longer had. "Jax," she ordered, "get to the weapons vault. We're going to need every advantage we can get." Jax nodded sharply, turning on his heel without hesitation. But as he reached for the door, a sudden pulse of energy struck the palace's outermost defenses, shaking the entire building to its core. The room plunged into darkness for a split second, followed by the sharp sound of alarms blaring. "Too late," shouted Draxon. "The shields are gone. We have no protection left." Outside, the sky began to pulse with the glow of the incoming enemy ships. They were descending upon the city, their shapes barely visible through the cloaking fields, but unmistakably lethal. The battle was about to begin in earnest, and Ilara knew that they had no choice but to fight. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. "We've been trained for this moment," she said, turning to the others. "We won't go down without a fight." As the first of the enemy's soldiers breached the palace's outer gates, Ilara felt the surge of power within her. Her telekinetic abilities flared, the air around her vibrating with raw energy. She was ready to unleash everything she had, every ounce of her strength, every trick she had learned since childhood. Jax returned, his face grim as he handed her a blaster and a set of energy shields. "This isn't just a fight for Vardax," he said, his voice heavy. "It's a fight for all of us, and you'll need more than power to win this one." Ilara took the weapons from him, her fingers brushing against his as they exchanged a look of understanding. This wasn't a game anymore. The stakes were higher than either of them could have anticipated. As the first wave of enemies entered the palace, Ilara gripped the blaster tightly, her eyes narrowing with resolve. This was no longer a matter of power. It was a matter of survival. And she was ready to prove once again that she would not go down easily. In this chapter, the threat becomes more immediate, and the stakes are raised with the introduction of the unknown enemy fleet. Ilara's playful demeanor shifts to a more serious, focused leadership role as she steps into battle. Jax's reliability and unspoken understanding with her create an evolving dynamic, which now extends into the battlefield. The narrative progresses quickly, building tension and anticipation for the upcoming conflict. The moment the palace's shields fell, Vardax became a war zone. The ground beneath Alara's feet vibrated with the force of incoming enemy blasts, each pulse shaking the very foundations of the city. The sky above had turned dark with the shadow of the invading fleet, their cloaking technology barely able to mask the enormity of their assault. The Tsilka, renowned for their defensive strategies and technological superiority, were suddenly on the back foot, and Alara, usually the playful princess, found herself thrust into the role of the city's last hope. "To your positions!" A voice screamed across the command center. "Prepare for ground assault. All forces, report to the outer gates." Alara could hear the frantic scramble of soldiers and engineers as they rushed to take up defensive posts. Her mind was focused, the usual distractions of royal life slipping away. The playful games with Jax, the power she wielded over her surroundings, no longer mattered. The city was under attack, and she was the one to defend it. "Jax," Alara called, her voice commanding yet steady. He was already by her side, his face grim and set in stone. "Princess," he said, his voice low, "I'll hold the western perimeter. You take the eastern wall. We can't let them breach the city's core." Alara nodded without hesitation. "We'll see them to the ground, Captain." Her telekinetic abilities surged within her, and the world around her seemed to slow. She could feel the energy in the air, the vibration of the enemy's presence, the echoes of their ships as they hovered overhead, preparing for the final assault. The invaders were here to take Vardax, but they were about to learn what it meant to face the full force of the Tsilka princess. She moved first. With a thought, the ground in front of her cracked and buckled. The invaders, who had been advancing cautiously, were thrown off balance as a shockwave rippled through the streets. Alara didn't wait for them to recover. She extended her arms, lifting several enemy soldiers off the ground and tossing them into nearby walls with devastating force. The air around her shimmered as her telekinetic blasts ripped through the enemies like a storm. Their armor crumpled under the weight of her power, and Alara felt a twisted satisfaction at the sight of their confusion. Her mind was sharp, her body lithe and graceful, as she glided through the battlefield, picking off the invaders one by one. They hadn't expected this, an overwhelming, unseen force that shattered their advance. The soldiers, each one suited in high-tech battle armor, stumbled as they struggled to adjust to the assault. They didn't understand what hit them. Most were too disoriented to react. But Alara's telekinesis wasn't the only weapon she had at her disposal. As the first wave began to falter, she reached for the blaster Jax had given her. The energy weapon hummed with power as she aimed and fired. The beam cut through the air, striking down the enemies that attempted to regroup. She was ruthless, calculating, and efficient, but the battle was far from over. The enemy commander, a towering figure clad in dark, jagged armor, stepped forward. His face was hidden behind a full helmet, but Alara could feel his presence. He was strong, stronger than the others, and there was something about him that unsettled her. His troops had been herded into the city's streets like cattle, but he seemed unaffected by the chaos. With a snarl, the commander raised his weapon. A blue bolt of energy streaked through the air and slammed into the side of the building beside Alara. The force knocked her off balance, sending her stumbling. Her breath hitched as the air around her shimmered in response to the blast. The commander was more than a soldier. He was something else, something that wasn't afraid of her abilities. Impressive. The commander's voice crackled through a speaker in his helmet. "But I am not so easily subdued." Alara's eyes narrowed as she steadied herself. "Then you are going to regret underestimating me." The battle around her had escalated. The streets were filled with smoke and the sound of distant explosions. But Alara was focused only on him. She could feel the enemy's energy pulse, the hum of power that came with each step he took. He was using some kind of energy shield, something beyond their technology, something designed to counter her powers. Jax had been right. They were not just fighting for Vardax. They were fighting for their lives. The invaders were no ordinary force, and she had no time to waste. "Jax!" she shouted, knowing he was still on the western perimeter. I need backup. Within seconds, Jax appeared at her side, moving with lethal precision, his blaster blazing. He took out two of the enemy's soldiers in a heartbeat, but the commander's shield absorbed every shot aimed at him. Jax's eyes met Alara's, his expression determined but frustrated. "He's too strong," Jax muttered. "We need a different approach." Alara's mind raced. The commander wasn't just a soldier. He was a strategic asset. He was more than capable of leading his forces, and he was the key to the enemy's success. If she could take him down, the rest would follow. "Leave him to me," she said, voice cold as steel. She motioned for Jax to cover her, and without another word, she moved forward. Her power surged within her as she launched herself at the commander, focusing every ounce of energy into one concentrated force. The air around her crackled as she hurled him back, sending a shockwave through the ground. The commander stumbled, but his shield held, flashing with blue light as it absorbed the impact. But Alara was relentless. She knew she couldn't defeat him through brute force alone. His shield was too powerful. She closed her eyes for a fraction of a second, feeling the energy in the surrounding environment. The air itself seemed to pulse with the energy of the battle. There were cracks in the shield, subtle, hidden flaws that only someone with her powers could detect. In a split second, she manipulated the surrounding energy, forcing it to concentrate around the commander's shield. She pressed harder, twisting the energy like a coil until it snapped, breaking the shield's integrity. The commander's helmeted face twisted in surprise, just as Alara's energy blast surged through his armor. The blast sent him flying backward, crashing into the ground with a deafening thud. For a moment, there was silence. Then the enemy's soldiers, seeing their leader defeated, hesitated. Alara stood over him, her breathing steady, her eyes burning with determination. The battle was far from over, but this was a turning point. The tide had shifted. The commander had been a symbol of their strength, and now that symbol lay broken at her feet. Jax stepped beside her, his expression unreadable. "Well done, Princess." Alara glanced at him, a hint of something flickering in her eyes. "We're not done yet, Captain." With the enemy commander down, Alara knew they had bought themselves a moment of respite, but the battle was far from won. The enemy forces were regrouping, and the fight for Vardax had only just begun. This chapter escalates the battle for Vardax, focusing on Alara's growing power and the increasing challenge posed by the invaders. The conflict builds to a head with unique action sequences, strategic thinking, and the introduction of a formidable enemy commander. It also highlights Alara's leadership and determination, as well as the dynamic between her and Jax, as they face an overwhelming enemy together. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid scent of burning metal. Vardax had withstood the initial onslaught, but the city was far from safe. The sound of distant explosions and the hum of battle continued to echo through the streets. Outside the palace, the enemy forces had begun to retreat, but Alara knew that the victory was only temporary. The invaders had tasted blood, and they would not give up easily. She stood in the command center, her thoughts racing as she tried to assess the damage. The flickering lights of the emergency holographic screens cast an eerie glow on the room, and the wounded were being carried in and out. Jack stood at her side, his face grim. His uniform was stained with dust and blood, but his posture remained unshaken. He had always been the model of stoic professionalism, but tonight she saw the cracks in his facade. "Princess," Draxon, her chief advisor, spoke up from the corner of the room, his tone strained. "The enemy fleet has retreated for now, but we've lost a substantial number of ground troops. The outer walls are barely holding. We'll need reinforcements from the Silka fleet if we are to stand a chance." Alara's mind whirred with the information. Reinforcements from the Silka fleet would take time they didn't have. Her eyes moved toward the map of the city displayed in the hologram, the sections of Vardax that had been breached flashing in red. "We'll need to fortify the city first," she said, her voice cold with command. "But we're not waiting for reinforcements. Gather the elites. We'll fight them off ourselves. Jack stepped forward, his voice low and hesitant. We can't go in without backup. They've already shown us they have the ability to strike where we least expect it. Elara looked at him, her mind snapping back to their earlier conversation. The moments spent fighting side by side had sharpened the bond between them, but there was no time for lingering thoughts. She had a city to save, and Jax was right. It wasn't just the enemy's soldiers she had to worry about. It was what came next. Her thoughts shifted to the strange pulse she had felt earlier, the dissonance that still buzzed in the back of her mind. The truth was there was more to this invasion than met the eye, but there would be no answers now. Jax held her gaze for a moment longer, a silent exchange passing between them before he nodded. I'll make the necessary arrangements, Princess, but you need to rest. Elara didn't respond. She couldn't rest, not while there was so much at stake. Her thoughts drifted, but the low hum of the palace's emergency sirens soon broke through her concentration. Suddenly, the door to the command center slid open, and a royal aide stepped in, her face pale. Princess, there's something you need to see. Elara's heart skipped a beat as she followed the aide down the narrow corridor to the palace's main atrium. There, a small group of the royal council had gathered, murmuring amongst themselves. Their voices were tinged with alarm, and as they saw her approach, they fell silent. The council's leader, an elderly and respected Silka named Valek, stepped forward, his expression grave. Princess, we have a delicate matter to address. Elara raised an eyebrow. What is it, Valek? The council leader exchanged a quick glance with the others before continuing. We received troubling reports from the city's medical facilities. It seems that you've become the subject of a rumor. A rumor, Elara repeated, confusion twisting her features. After everything that's happened, you call this a rumor? Valek nodded slowly. It concerns your health, Princess. There have been reports circulating among the medical staff and some high-ranking officials that you might be pregnant. The words hit her like a physical blow. She blinked, feeling the blood drain from her face. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her heart pounded in her chest as the weight of the statement settled over her. She looked at Jax, whose face had gone a shade paler, though his jaw was set with determination. This is absurd, Elara said, her voice icy. I am not pregnant, but the whispers had already spread. As soon as the words were out, they caught fire like kindling. The room buzzed with disbelief and uncertainty. Valek spoke again, his tone cautious. Princess, we cannot ignore the reports. It's more than just a rumor. We have physical evidence that suggests. Enough! Elara snapped, her telekinetic power flaring in the room. The air shimmered with energy as she restrained herself from unleashing it. This is nonsense. There is no truth to these claims. I am not with child. The council leader held up a hand, attempting to calm her. We understand, Princess, but you must consider the consequences. If the rumor persists, it will be impossible to maintain control of the people. Vardax is on the edge, and this scandal could undermine your authority. Jax's eyes met hers, and though his expression remained unreadable, there was a flicker of something more. Concern, maybe? He stepped forward, his voice quiet but urgent. Elara, you have to address this. If there's even a chance this rumor is true, it will have consequences far beyond the palace. She shot him a sharp look, but then looked down at her hands, her mind racing. A pregnancy? It was impossible. The thought of bearing a child now, in the middle of a war, seemed ridiculous. But the evidence, whatever it was, had caused chaos. And in the Tsilka court, chaos was something that could topple even the mightiest. We need to stop this now, Elara said, her voice hardening. I'll find out where this came from. If someone is behind this lie, I will make them pay. But even as she spoke, a dark thought lingered at the edge of her mind. Could it be true? Could the very bond she shared with Jax, Those strange moments when their powers had seemed to align have caused something she hadn't expected, a connection so strong it could have triggered something neither of them had anticipated. Before she could dwell on it further, Valak spoke again, his tone even more urgent. Princess, there's one more thing. The enemy has infiltrated the city's communications. They've spread this rumor deliberately. Someone in our court is aiding them. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. The revelation sent a chill through her. Her mind raced. The stakes were higher than ever. The pregnancy scandal was no accident. Someone had orchestrated it, and they had done it for a reason. And that reason was far bigger than a mere power struggle. Someone was playing a dangerous game, and Ilara had just become its unwitting pawn. In this chapter, the battle for Vardax takes a back seat to the political intrigue and personal revelations that begin to emerge. The pregnancy scandal throws Ilara into an unexpected crisis, and the discovery that the enemy has infiltrated her court adds another layer of danger. The tension between Ilara and Jax is subtly developed, as both of them must navigate not only the external threats, but also the complex dynamics within their own ranks. The chapter sets the stage for a deeper conspiracy, and the realization that the stakes are not just about Vardax's survival, but also about Ilara's own identity and her future.